Hi everyone, welcome back to Rachel's Enchanting Cakes. Now for today's content, I'm going to be showing you how to get this beautiful, striking, continuous quilting effect on your cakes. This completely covers the cake. You can't tell where we have added the actual pattern. It is so stunning. And even better, these roses, they have been made using the easiest rose cutter ever. But just look how detailed they are. As always, everything you need to know in a straight to the point, step-by-step format. Let's make a start. This is my flat layer sponge recipe. First of all, we need 300 grams of a baking margarine. You want to weigh this directly into your mixing bowl. Now, this recipe has been shared before, and yes, you can use butter. However, the butter does tend to make it more dense and it may dome slightly in the centre. Baking margarines are one of the best ways to go, and it tastes just as nice. We now need some caster sugar. Remember, this is for a 6-inch round, 4-inch deep cake. You want to weigh this out in a separate bowl, and again, it wants to be exactly 300 grams. Add the weighed out caster sugar directly to the mixing bowl that already contains your baking margarine. You then want to beat this on high until you can no longer see any grains of sugar. Whilst this is beating, we are going to continue preparing the rest of the ingredients. Our next ingredient is self-raising flour. Now, it doesn't matter what brand you are using, just make sure it is self-raising. Again, in a separate bowl, weigh out exactly 300 grams. In a separate jug, I beat 6 eggs. You then want to add to this exactly 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla extract. Remember, this is for a 6-inch round cake. The vanilla extract I like to use is Nelson Massey, and it really does make a difference with the flavour. So going back to the mixer, this is what the creamed baking margarine and caster sugar will now look like. So we have our separate weighed out ingredients. Now, I've speeded this part up, but you're going to see me make the whole part of the batter process. We want to add a few eggs. We're going to constantly adjust the speed of the mixer. Then we also want to add some flour. The secret to all of this is to prevent curdling. So I turn the mixer down so it's not as fast when adding the eggs. Then I go right up and turn the mixer so it's faster and turn it back down to add a small amount of flour before turning it up again. Once you have mastered your mixer, you will soon get the hang of this. If you add too much liquid all at once, you are running the risk of it curdling. This is about getting the air in there so it rises perfectly. So you can see here just how well lined my baking tins are. There's roughly about 6 layers of baking paper in each one of them. Obviously the baking paper overlaps because it's long, and then I've got 4 pieces on the base of each tin. The foil underneath the tins doesn't do anything other than preventing all of that butter that I have used to line the baking tins from leaking all over the oven. Because these are relatively small tins, just a 6-inch, I also place them on a baking tray. A lot easier to place in the oven. Simply place your cake batter in each of the tins. Now mine are very deep tins. They're roughly 4 inches deep each tin. And you can see just how high up it is actually going. I then add a piece of baking paper over the top. This just helps stop the tops of your cakes going too crusty and dark. I then place them in the oven at roughly 180 degrees centigrade for 45 to 50 minutes for the 6-inch because there is quite a lot of cake batter in there. Now these are really hot. They've just been taken out of the oven. You can see all the fat from where I've lined the tin. I just want you to see exactly how much baking paper I use and just how lovely the cakes have actually come out. So here I'm taking it all away. I've made sure to put on some kitchen roll just underneath because obviously all the fat's dripping down. But as you can see, there is an awful lot of baking paper. This just protects the sides of your cake from going crusty, and obviously the base. We've already had one on the top. Now obviously the top's going to be slightly browner, and it is, but by protecting it with that extra piece of baking paper, which you saw me do just before it went into the oven, it really does make a difference. But just look at how lovely and deep these are, and they are completely flat. Okay, so the following day, this has completely cooled down. It's just been wrapped in cling film. I'm now going to take off that top layer. You do not have to do this. That's the whole point in a flat layer sponge cake. I like to because I do not like the crusts. But again, if you don't want to, you do not have to. So to fill our cake, start by adding a thin layer of buttercream. This is because I'm going to be placing jam. This will just help prevent the jam from soaking into the sponge. You then need to create a well. So fill a piping bag with the remainder buttercream and simply go around the outside. Once you have done this, you then want to fill the centre with the jam of your choice. I like Hartley's jam and I like the seedless versions. Now I do add an awful lot of filling into mine. Due to this, once you have filled it with jam and then covered the top with another layer of buttercream, I place some cling film over the cake to protect it and place it in the fridge to allow the buttercream to set. Here you can see that the buttercream is firm to the touch. Now because we have allowed it to set in the fridge for a short period of time, it just means this is going to prevent our cake from bulging where all of that filling is. I then place on the other layer and do a basic crumb coat. So you just want to add a thin layer of buttercream to the outside and the top of your cake. This does not have to be neat because we are covering it with the fondant quilting effect in a short while. But this is going to act like a glue for the fondant, but it's also going to help protect the cake from the air, which in turn helps protect the cake from going dry. So my cake is currently in the fridge, covered with some cling film, just to keep it chilled. Here I have 5mm spacers and the colour of my choice in fondant. You simply want to roll this out in between the 5mm spacers. This is going to be to cover the top of the cake. So if you have done the same size as mine, it doesn't need to be any larger than 6-inch round. I then simply cut out a 6-inch round circle before applying it to the top of the cake. I find it easiest this way. However, if you wanted to, you could place the fondant that you've just rolled out directly on top and then cut it away. Just cut the excess. You want to get this as smooth as possible, both on the top and around the sides. So for this beautiful continuous quilting effect, I am using the Katie Sue Continuous Quilting Silicone Mould. So this is what the packaging looks like just here on the left hand side, and here is the detailed mould. Now it fits together beautifully. I'm going to show you that as we apply it to the cake. You can use it either way. So if you're doing a really tall cake, you can do it lengthways, or even if your cake was double the size of this, you will see here how it all slots together. That's what makes this mould so perfect. You can literally use this on any sized cake. Start by adding a small amount of icing sugar directly to the silicone mould and then just tipping out any excess. Step 1. I have rolled out some more fondant, again 5mm thick, and I want to leave an impression of the mat directly on top. This way I can cut away the excess before placing it into the mould. I find this makes it an awful lot easier to do. After following the lines from the indentations on the fondant and cutting away the excess, you then want to take your time pushing this into the mould to pick up on all that detail. Once I have made sure it's pushed in really well, I then flip it over and then I use my rolling pin, but I use it very gently on the opposite side. Now I use my mould slightly differently. If I'm not in a rush, once this has been placed in there correctly, I then place it in the fridge and I allow the fondant to go really hard. There will be condensation when you take it out of the fridge. However, it's not instantaneous. It gives you time to take this away from the mould without damage, but also to apply to the cake before it then starts to sweat. Once it has finished sweating due to the condensation, the fondant will set beautifully. If I'm in a rush, I will place it in the freezer because then it will set even faster. So that's my tip for using these moulds and getting them out absolutely perfect. Chill the fondant first. So this has been in the fridge, and just look how beautiful the mould comes away and all of the fondant keeps its shape and stays intact. I can now apply this to the cake. To keep things simple, I have measured the height of the cake, and then I have cut off some excess that I had on the bottom. I simply stick this directly onto the cake and the buttercream acts like a natural glue. When I apply the second piece, I just added a small amount of water to the fondant where the fondant's going to be sticking, but just look how flawless that seam is. This is what I love about these moulds. You can't tell where you've applied the next panel. So the buttercream's doing the rest of the work with the cake, but I really focus on that seam where they are meeting. And because the fondant is chilled, it's very difficult to damage. So you've got some time to work with this and get it absolutely perfect. So with the last piece, all I did was first of all place it next to the cake so I had a rough idea of how large it needed to be. Because this has been chilled again, you're not going to risk damaging it, but you can see it will meet from where it starts to where it finishes. This one can be a little bit more fiddly. You're wanting to get it absolutely perfect. You do not want to see the buttercream underneath. I have added a small amount of water again to the fondant where it's actually meeting, because this will help it stick. But just look at how flawless it actually ends up looking when you have done. Now, if you wanted to, you could add some edible pearls in each of those indentations. But to be completely honest, I think this mould just makes a cake look so elegant and beautiful. They really are not necessary. So that's our cake, but now we need our roses. Now for this, believe it or not, I've used the easiest rose cutter ever. I was quite hesitant at first, but I was really surprised with the result. I'm using modelling paste, and in total I just cut out 2 pieces of this for the large rose. My modelling paste is just a couple of millimetres thick. Using a ball tool, I simply thin the ends of each petal slightly. If you do not have a ball tool, you could always use a rolling pin for this. Using a small amount of edible glue straight down the centre, I then simply fold this in half. Once you have done this and secured it into place, we now need to roll it up. Now you want it facing upright. Do not roll this whilst it's on its back. Keep hold of the base and simply roll it all together. Once you have got to the end, you can then adjust the petals slightly. Once we have done this, we are going to prepare the next piece to simply add directly to this in order to create a large rose. However, for the smaller roses, you can simply leave it like this, but just look how easy that actually was to achieve. So if we have repeated that process, here I have the rose, and I've already added a small amount of edible glue directly to the base, and then we just simply wrap this around. This will give us a larger rose. We can then negotiate the petals just a little bit more, and look at how easy but stunning this rose actually is. I then just placed the roses directly onto my cake with some edible glue, but just look how elegant and beautiful this actually is. Now remember, the quilting effect around the outside was made super easy just using that mould. You only need 3 pieces for a 6-inch cake. not to mention the roses. Now, if you're used to making sugar roses, you will know how time consuming they actually are. So this rose cutter will save you so much time and consequently money, because it just means when you have a customer wanting this type of cake, you do not need to charge extra in regards to the roses you are creating. I really do hope I've helped you all again today. Thank you all for your amazing support, and I'll be back soon with an awful lot more new, completely free content.